Beneath the scorching Arizona sun, Mara Vega bore a mark that wasn't just ink. It was a scar of secrets, a whisper of a war erased from history. Mocked by young soldiers who saw only a faded tattoo on an aging technician, she carried a truth so dangerous it could unravel a military empire. When her past came crashing into the present, one question burned. Could a single woman, armed only with resilience and a hidden story, rewrite the future of justice? Join us as we uncover Mara's fight, a tale of courage that will grip your heart and remind you that even the quietest voices can shatter silence. The words cut through the air with all the subtlety of a punch. That ain't a soldier's tattoo. That's prison ink. The young recruit didn't even look up. His words spat out loud enough for everyone to hear. The others chuckled, a trio of sharp, cruel voices, each laugh like a slap. Mara didn't flinch. Her shoulders shifted slightly as if to say, I've been through worse. The black spiral tattoo near her collarbone flashed in the harsh sunlight as she rolled her shoulder back, just enough to make it visible. And that was the moment everything changed. One of the officers dropped his tablet, his fingers fumbling. Another reached for his radio, his hands shaking. In mere minutes, the silence of Phoenix Valley Air Base shattered, replaced by the scream of sirens and the sudden, terrifying awareness that the woman they had mocked, a woman in a tank top covered in sweat and years of unseen scars, was more than a joke. She was a federal trigger. The sun beat relentlessly down on the tarmac, hot enough to shimmer off the sleek metal bodies of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, parked in perfect rows. Phoenix Valley, an air base that could have been any base, any desert outpost, was a furnace. The heat crawled across the asphalt, wrapping everything in a sticky haze of dry air. Mara Vega stood beneath it all, adjusting her gloves, which were already slick with sweat, as she pulled off her flight jacket. Beneath, her worn tank top clung to her body, exposed muscles flexing with the movement. Remnants of years spent wrestling with engines and machines. Her arms glistened under the sunlight, rippling with the strength of hard work. And the tattoo, that twisting double helix, was always there, hidden beneath her clothing. But today it was visible, a reminder of something buried, something no one ever spoke of. To an outsider, the tattoo was a meaningless tangle of lines, strange glyphs with no explanation. But for those who knew, it was a story. It was survival. It was history. At 44, Mara was a veteran in more ways than one. She didn't belong to the new generation that came and went in a blur of quick promotions and rapid turnover. She was the constant, worn and tired, yes, but still standing when others had long since burned out. But today, beneath her calm exterior, something simmered, something dangerous. Across the bay, three young airmen leaned against the bulkhead, lazily scanning their phones. Daniels, the cocky private, nudged his friends and nodded toward Mara. Check out the old lady in the tank top, he whispered loud enough for her to hear. Bet she thinks she's still fighting some war. His friends laughed, their voices sharp and filled with the arrogance only youth can carry. Look at that tattoo, one of them sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. Prison ink, huh? Daniels grinned, stepping closer. Hey, tank top girl, what's the deal with the ink? You some gang member or what? Mara didn't flinch, not even as their laughter echoed off the concrete walls. She kept her eyes on the task at hand, checking the fuel valves, her fingers steady, the process automatic. It was a familiar sting, this kind of insult, but one she had long since learned to ignore. You don't know what you're looking at, she said, her voice low but firm. The youngest airman smirked, his eyes glinting with the usual cocky ignorance. That's the point. Nobody here does. Maybe it's a prison tattoo, or maybe it's just some dumb symbol. Daniel stepped even closer, a grin spreading across his face. Or maybe you're hiding something worse, like some canceled weapon program. At that, everything went still. The laughter died in their throats, and for a moment the air thickened with something more than mockery. Mara's gaze flicked toward them, sharp, like the edge of a blade, unyielding. You have no idea, she muttered, barely above a whisper. The hum of drone engines in the background seemed to fade away, replaced by the weight of Mara's unspoken words. Daniels, however, raised his phone, aiming it at her exposed shoulder. Let's get a closer look, he said, grinning. Maybe the brass will want to see what their old tech is hiding. Mara's jaw clenched, her heart thumping louder in her chest. She knew exactly what this meant. Her tattoo wasn't just ink. It was a scar from a life she had fought to leave behind, a mark of a past erased from official records. And now someone might just expose everything she had buried under layers of lies and forgotten files. She wiped the sweat from her brow, steadied her breath, and returned to her work. But in her mind, a storm was gathering. Because the truth wasn't just in her tattoo, it was in the shadow of Gorgon 7, a weaponized program she had been a part of, one that had nearly destroyed her. And if anyone found out, it would be the end of everything. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of the situation sink in. The sun blazed above, scorching her exposed skin, but the fire beneath her tattoo was colder, older, and more dangerous. This symbol wasn't some random design. It was a testament to a war no one wanted to remember. The buzzing of radios, the clattering of tools, and the heavy steps of technicians moving through the bay all blended into a symphony of mechanical noise. Yet, amidst it all, the jeers of the young soldiers cut through the air like a blade, relentless in their ignorance. One of them, a wiry private, muttered loud enough for her to hear. Bet she thinks she's the hero from some canceled program no one remembers. His friends snickered, raising their phones in preparation to capture her discomfort. Mara gripped the wrench in her hand, her fingers tightening. The memories came rushing back. The long hours in cold briefing rooms, the erasure of records, the hushed conversations where her name was never spoken aloud. She was a survivor of Gorgon 7, a neural interface program designed to merge human cognition with unmanned combat vehicles. A program deemed too dangerous, too unstable, and quietly buried after too many lives were lost. The irony wasn't lost on her. The program that had cost her everything, her career, her sanity, her future, was now fodder for whispered jokes and mocking laughter in the very place she had been forced to rebuild her life. She breathed deeply, forcing the anger back into the pit of her stomach. "It's more than you think," she said quietly. "This tattoo, it's the last trace of a war no one wants to remember." Daniel snorted, the sound dismissive, careless. "A war that ended before we were born. What's the big deal, old-timer? You're just a relic." His words stung, but Mara held her ground. Strength wasn't always about speaking louder. Sometimes it was about standing firm in the silence between words, in the quiet determination that no one could take away. She shifted her weight, adjusting the fuel injector in the drone she was working on. The engine hummed beneath her hands, steady, relentless, a reminder that progress and destruction were always intertwined. Nearby, a supervisor approached, her eyes scanning the tension between Mara Sutter and the soldiers. Without a word, she gave Mara a subtle nod, a gesture that spoke volumes. "Ignore them, keep to your task." Mara glanced up briefly, her gaze flickering with gratitude, though her face remained stoic. Allies, however few, were worth everything. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the temperature soared. Sweat trickled down Mara's back, mixing with the old aches that never seemed to fade. But the three soldiers, still caught in their petty amusement, remained blissfully unaware of the storm they had just unleashed. Suddenly, the sharp crackle of the base PA system shattered the uneasy calm. "Attention all personnel," the voice crackled. "Colonel Thomas Quincaid will conduct an immediate inspection of UAV maintenance protocols in Hangar 3. And just like that, Mara knew her past was about to collide with her present, and nothing would be the same. Under the scorching Arizona sun, the air was thick with heat and tension. The sound of the drone's steady hum mixed with the faint buzz of footsteps approaching, steps that heralded the moment when past secrets would collide with the present. Mara Vega stood at the tarmac of Phoenix Valley Air Base, wiping the sweat from her brow as she adjusted her gloves. The glaring sunlight bounced off the metal of the drones, casting long, harsh shadows across the vast expanse of concrete. She peeled off her weathered flight jacket, revealing a simple tank top that clung to her skin, drenched from the relentless heat. But it was not just the oppressive weather that weighed on her. On her exposed shoulder, partially hidden by the fabric, was a tattoo, twisting double helix intertwined with cryptic symbols. To most, it was just ink. To Mara, it was a symbol of survival, a badge of battles long forgotten, a reminder of a weapon program erased from history, a scar that should never have existed. As a 4-year-old veteran technician with years of experience at the base, Mara moved with the precision of someone who knew her job well. Her steady hands and calm demeanor were the result of years of practice. But beneath her composed exterior, a storm raged, a storm fueled by the suppressed truth of her past. She was determined to keep moving forward, to maintain the silence of her secrets, even as she could feel the weight of them pressing down on her shoulders. Nearby, a group of young airmen loitered, whispering and snickering among themselves. "Look at the tank top lady," one of them sneered. "Doesn't she know she's not in basic anymore?" The others laughed, their phones raised to capture the moment, filming Mara with mocking grins plastered across their faces. "Check out that tattoo," another remarked. "Looks like prison ink or gang marks. What's she trying to prove?" Mara didn't flinch. She didn't turn to face them, but she could feel their eyes on her. With a soft CA, she muttered under her breath, "You have no idea." The taunts continued, but she didn't break her focus. The tallest of the young soldiers moved closer, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Hey, tank top girl, what's with the ink? Some canceled weapon program or what?" She didn't respond. She couldn't afford to. The risk of them uncovering the truth behind that tattoo, was too great. That mark on her shoulder, a relic of the Gorgon 7 neural interface project, was the last thread keeping her connected to a past that was supposed to be forgotten. If anyone learned its true meaning, everything she'd fought to hide would be exposed. The drone's hum seemed louder now, its mechanical rhythm a harsh reminder of the dual nature of her existence. Progress and destruction intertwined. She tightened her grip on the wrench she was holding, feeling the resolve surge within her. The past was about to surface. She would confront it, no matter the cost. A sharp announcement blared over the base's PA system, slicing through the tension like a knife. "Colonel Thomas Quincaid to Hangar 3 for immediate inspection." Her heart skipped a beat. Quincaid, the man responsible for erasing her from the official records. The man who had authorized the cover-up of the Gorgon 7 project. And now he was here. She had spent years hiding from him, burying the past as deep as she could. But today, that buried past was coming to light. As if on cue, a helicopter's roar split the sky, its blades slicing through the desert air. Colonel Thomas Quincaid's black transport descended onto the tarmac, his arrival marking the start of something unavoidable. A man of control, a man of secrets. Quincaid carried with him a weight of classified knowledge and buried truths. Today, that weight would come crashing down. He moved through the hangar with deliberate steps, his crisp uniform standing out starkly against the grease-smeared coveralls of the technicians around him. His gaze scanned the area, quickly assessing the maintenance operations. But then his eyes stopped, frozen in shock as they fell on Mara. There she stood, bent over a drone's fuel system, her tattoo exposed, a glaring symbol of the very project he had tried to bury. His breath hitched, his skin turned pale. Years of carefully constructed lies and silences began to fracture in that single moment. His hand trembled as he pulled out his phone, tapping furiously. "Security alert level 3, immediate lockdown, full sweep of Hangar 3. All personnel remain at their stations. Secure all terminals." The announcement crackled over the loudspeakers, setting the base into motion. Red lights blinked to life. Gates slammed shut. Armed guards moved swiftly into position. Mara sensed the change in the atmosphere immediately. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She looked up to see a squad of security officers approaching her, their faces unreadable, their movements resolute. One step forward, holding out a badge. "Miss Vega, Colonel Quincaid requests your presence in the secure briefing room. Immediate compliance required." Without hesitation, Mara nodded, leaving her tools behind. The silent march through the maze of corridors and secured doors was a stark contrast to the pounding of her heart. She had been in this situation before, but never like this. Never with the weight of her past so exposed. Inside the briefing room, the lights were harsh and sterile, the air thick with tension. Colonel Quincaid stood before her, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. "Explain this," he demanded, gesturing sharply to her exposed tattoo. Mara met his gaze without flinching. "This mark exists because I exist, despite your efforts to erase me." Quincaid's jaw tightened. His voice dropped to a low, controlled growl. Your continued existence is a liability. Mara's eyes hardened, and her voice rang out with steady conviction. I am not your liability. I am the warning. The words hung in the air, charged with the weight of years of silence and betrayal. Outside, the base's security systems hummed with relentless vigilance. Inside, the battle for the truth had just begun. Across Hangar 3, the security alert blared once more. Red lights flashed urgently, cutting through the mechanical hum of the base. Soldiers snapped to attention. Technicians halted their work. The atmosphere shifted from routine to crisis in the span of a heartbeat. Colonel Quincaid strode into the center of the hangar, his presence demanding immediate respect. His eyes swept over the room before locking onto Mara. There she stood, her tattoo visible for the world to see. Disbelief flickered across his face. Panic followed. Years of effort to bury this chapter in the dark, forgotten corners of history were now at risk of unraveling in an instant. He whispered harshly into his radio, "Initiate lockdown, secure all sensitive areas, locate Mara Vega immediately." Mara met his gaze across the hangar, their recognition silent but heavy, as if the past and present had collided with the force of a storm. Mara Vega stood in silence, feeling the weight of history pressed down on her. There were no words spoken, yet in the brief exchange of glance, the decades of secrets, betrayals, and erasure hung in the air like an unspoken truth. Two security officers approached, their badges gleaming in the harsh light of the hangar. One of them spoke in a clipped tone. "Colonel Quincaid requires your presence in the secure briefing room. We'll escort you." Without a word, Mara dropped her tools on the workbench, the metallic clink of them echoing in the cavernous room. She nodded in acceptance, her expression impassive, but her mind sharp, calculating the steps ahead. The corridor was a labyrinth of cold steel, its walls lined with surveillance cameras. Every door was locked and heavily guarded as the officers guided her deeper into the heart of the base. The silence around her was oppressive, each step carrying her closer to the nerve center of the operation that had once tried to erase her existence. Inside the sterile briefing room, Colonel Quincaid stood near a large screen, the schematics of drones and neural interface technology flickering in front of him. His eyes were fixed on her tattoo, the same mark that had been scrubbed from official records more than a decade ago. That symbol, Quincaid began, his voice cold, was expunged from all official records. Your presence here is an anomaly. Mara met his gaze without flinching. I am no anomaly, she said quietly. I am the last living witness to Gorgon 7. Quincaid's jaw tightened, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Your existence is a risk, he replied, his voice low and threatening. A breach of security and protocol. Mara folded her arms across her chest, her voice unwavering. I am not your breach. The lies and erasures are. The tension in the room thickened, and the air felt suffocating as silence stretched between them. Outside, the base seemed to be holding its breath. Security teams moved in, isolating the room, but Mara felt the weight of the moment more than the immediate danger. The program that had once tried to erase her, and the truth, was stirring back to life. This, she knew, was only the beginning. The interrogation room was stark and impersonal, its cold fluorescent lights illuminating every detail, every wrinkle on her face, every tremor in her hands. Mara sat at the metal table, rigid and composed, her sharp eyes flickering from the door to the faces of the engineers and officers arrayed before her. There was an unspoken tension in the room, a palpable sense that history was waiting to be confronted. The lead interrogator, a woman with sharp glasses and a clipboard, opened Mara's file, flipping through the pages with deliberate slowness. On the screen beside her, Mara's tattoo appeared, a complex double helix entwined with cryptic symbols that no longer appeared in any official database. Instead, the bio-ID was flagged as restricted, terminated Project Gorgon 7. A younger technician hesitated, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through corrupted files and redacted logs. There's no accessible data, he murmured. Only warning flags and incomplete records. Quincaid stepped forward, his presence casting a long shadow. That bio-ID was part of a neural interface program designed to integrate human cognition with unmanned aerial vehicles, he said flatly. The project was scrapped after catastrophic neurological damage was discovered in test subjects. The official line is clear. Project terminated. Data purged. Mara's voice was soft but firm. I'm not a test subject. I'm a survivor. She met Quincade's eyes with steady defiance. I never agreed to be erased. The room seemed to stiffen at her words, and Quincade's expression hardened. You were never meant to exist in official records. You were a liability to the program and to the command structure. Mara shifted in her chair, her calm exterior masking the pain that flickered briefly in her eyes. The experiment failed because you ignored the risks, she said. My colleagues are dead, their sacrifices silenced. A murmur rippled through the group, but Quincade was unshaken. The program was shut down for the greater good. Your involvement was classified, necessary for national security. Mara leaned forward slightly, her voice resolute. But my survival proves the cost was too high. The risks you buried are still alive, right here. She tapped her tattoo. And in the drones you continue to test. One of the senior engineers leaned in, his voice hesitant. We've seen anomalies in UAV behavior linked to unregulated neural feedback loops, unauthorized code usage. Mara nodded. Because the system's core was never truly dismantled. It was shelved, yes, but its legacy haunts every new iteration. The room fell silent, the only sound the low hum of the ventilation. Quincade folded his arms, his voice dropping to a cold, warning tone. You will cooperate fully and the truth will be contained. Mara's eyes flashed with icy resolve, or it will be exposed. Hours passed in relentless questioning, technical analysis, and veiled threats. But Mara remained unbroken, her silence a fortress that not even the most insistent interrogator could breach. The bio was more than a tattoo. It was a beacon, a call to the ghosts of Gorgon 7, drawing them out from hiding. When the interrogation finally ended, Mara was left alone in the cold, sterile room. The door clicked shut behind the last interrogator, and the silence that followed was suffocating. She sat back, her mind reeling with the weight of her survival and the burden of a truth no one dared face. Her fingers traced the faded tattoo on her shoulder, a mark once hidden beneath layers of secrecy, now exposed under harsh scrutiny. It was more than just ink. It was her story, a story erased from every official ledger, every database. Yet it remained undeniable and raw. Outside the interrogation room, the base was in turmoil. A level 3 security alert had been issued, sending ripples of unease through the personnel. Whispers filled the corridors, passing from mouth to mouth like an electric current, carrying with them a mix of fear and fascination. The ghost of Gorgon 7 is back, one technician murmured, eyes wide with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Mara's mind drifted back to the dark days of the program, the promises of a revolution in warfare. Neural control of drones had been meant to give soldiers an edge, an extension of the human mind. But the quest had been terrible. Test subjects had suffered neurological breakdowns. Some had died, others vanished without a trace. Mara had volunteered, driven by a desperate hope to save her brother, who had died testing the very technology she now bore as a scar. The memories were vivid, endless hours in sterile labs, the hum of machines monitoring brain activity, the shock waves of electrical stimuli coursing through her nervous system. Her body still remembered the chaos of the final test, the malfunction that had left her burned, broken, and officially dead on paper. Yet here she was, carrying the truth beneath her skin. Her reverie was broken when the door slid open once more. 2 security officers appeared, their expressions unreadable. Without a word, they gestured for her to follow. The story was far from over. The hallway seemed endless, its sterile walls reflecting only the soft echo of Mara's footsteps. Faces blurred past her, engineers, soldiers, technicians, all offering her furtive glances or averted eyes. Some looked at her with muted curiosity, others with something darker. Fear, perhaps, or resentment. She had become an enigma to them, a living relic of a time they'd rather forget. She was both a warning and a ghost, a woman whose very presence whispered of hidden truths and buried secrets. As she rounded the corner, the escort, silent and efficient, led her to a small, dimly lit room. Inside, a young woman sat behind a cluttered table, surrounded by papers and digital tablets. She looked up, her gaze momentarily meeting Mara's. Lieutenant Natalie Zhao, she introduced herself quietly, her voice laced with a hint of respect. Systems analyst. I'm assigned to review the project files. Mara's gaze lingered on the young woman, studying her carefully. I've heard stories about you, Natalie added, as if unsure whether to be afraid or intrigued. Mara nodded faintly. Not all stories are true, but some truths refuse to die. Together they pored over the fragmented records, corrupted files, and heavily redacted reports. There were schematic blueprints of neural interfaces and drone control systems, all of them incomplete and scattered. Each page a piece of the puzzle that had cost so many lives. As they dug deeper, the truth began to emerge in fragments. Gorgon 7, a program officially terminated long ago, had not been destroyed. Instead, parts of it had been resurrected in secret experiments, and someone was conducting unauthorized tests using fragments of the code from Mara's past. Natalie's voice broke the silence, her tone grim. Someone's running unauthorized tests, using fragments of your old program. Mara's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. I knew this day would come. That's why I recorded everything. Every meeting, every anomaly. The truth doesn't disappear just because they erased it. Natalie met her gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between them. You're not alone, she said, her voice soft but resolute. There are others who want the truth out. For a moment, Mara allowed herself a rare, fleeting smile. Then let's make sure they hear it. As they made plans to confront the ghosts of Gorgon 7, Mara could feel the fire inside her rekindle. It wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. It was about justice, for all the lives lost in silence and darkness. The weight of the years of silence seemed to lift, replaced by a fierce sense of purpose. She was no longer a lone survivor. She had allies now. Mara leaned back against the cold wall of the room, her fingers absently tracing the edges of the tattoo on her arm. The mark was more than ink. It was a reminder, a symbol of survival. She had lived through things no one should have to endure, and yet here she was, still breathing, still fighting. The tattoo, etched deep with pain and promise, was a permanent scar, a memorial to all that had been lost. Her eyes drifted to the documents scattered across the table. Corrupted data, redacted files, incomplete schematics, all reminders of the broken promises and forgotten lives of Gorgon 7. And yet, she was the last living link to that terrible chapter. The military had erased her existence, but they hadn't erased the truth. Natalie's voice brought her back to the present. We have to act carefully. Whoever's behind this and won't let us expose it easily. Mara nodded slowly, her eyes hardening with resolve. They underestimated what survives in the shadows. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time in years, Mara felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone anymore, and the ghosts of Gorgon 7 were waking. She was ready to face them. The sterile interrogation room was cold, its harsh fluorescent lights casting shadows across the hard, emotionless faces of the officers. Mara sat upright, her posture rigid, the memories of everything she had endured flashing in her mind. Across from her, Colonel Thomas Quincaid sat, his expression a mixture of frustration and calculation. You owe us the truth, Miss Vega, he said, his voice clipped, professional, but cold. Why did you volunteer for Gorgon 7? And why are you still here, defying all orders to remain classified? Mara inhaled deeply, collecting the fragments of a story that had nearly destroyed her. My brother, she began, her voice low but steady. He was an engineer on the UAV project, one of the brightest minds we had. Her eyes narrowed with cold fury. He died because of a signal failure during a test flight, a failure that could have been prevented if the risks we raised had been taken seriously. Quincaid's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. Accidents happen in development. Miss Vega, you volunteered for Gorgon 7 knowing the risks. Mara's eyes flashed with anger. I volunteered so no one else would have to die like he did. Her fingers traced the edge of her sleeve, pulling it back to reveal the tattoo on her arm, the intertwined helix that marked her as part of Gorgon 7. It was more than just a symbol. It was a reminder, a promise. This tattoo, she whispered, her voice barely audible, is a promise to carry on, to expose what was done, and to protect those who still suffer. Kincaid looked away, discomfort flickering across his features. Your records were erased. Your existence was denied for your safety and to protect the integrity of the program. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line. Erased, yes, but I am not gone. Her voice grew louder, infused with the years of pain and betrayal. You authorized my removal from everyday database. I was erased to hide the failures and protect your careers. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the ventilation system. Mara's gaze didn't waver as she continued. They thought if I disappeared, the ghosts of Gorgon 7 would disappear with me, but they were wrong. You underestimated what it means to survive. She slid a small folder toward Kincaid. These are the reports, the emails, the complaints I filed, ignored, suppressed, buried. Kincaid stared at the folder, but said nothing. Mara leaned forward, her eyes burning with conviction. I carved this tattoo not just as a mark, but as a message. I was here. I endured. And I will not be forgotten. Her gaze softened just for a moment. I volunteered to test the neural interface because I believed in its promise. But when that promise turned to pain, I was abandoned. Her voice cracked with the weight of the betrayal. I was told to be silent, to live as a ghost. But every day I lived was a challenge to that lie. Kincaid's expression hardened. He masked his guilt behind a veil of cold resolve. The program was too dangerous. It had to be stopped. Mara's eyes blazed with fury. Stopped, yes, but not forgotten, and certainly not buried. She sat back, exhaustion and defiance warring within her. There are others like me, still in the shadows. The experiments didn't end when the project was canceled. They're trying to resurrect the cone without the safeguards, without regard for the human kind. The room was silent, the tension palpable. Kincaid's voice dropped to a near whisper. You have no proof. Mara's hand hovered over a small recorder on the table. I have months of recordings, internal meetings, technical briefings, whispered conversations. With a click, she pressed play, and the room filled with the low murmur of voices, long-buried secrets now coming to light. The voices in the room discussed unauthorized codes, escalating tests, and attempts to sidestep ethical guidelines. Enough. Colonel Kincaid's voice cut through the air, silencing the playback. Mara met his gaze, unflinching. You can try to silence me, she said, her voice steady, but the truth is louder than your protocols. She stood, her eyes burning with defiance. I will expose what you tried to hide, for my brother, for myself, and for those who cannot speak. Kincaid's fists clenched, his knuckles white with barely restrained fury. You will regret this, he warned, his voice low and dangerous. Mara smiled, cold and unwavering. I have nothing left to lose. The tension in the air thickened, the sterile environment seeming to hum with the unspoken confrontation. Mara's journey from a forgotten volunteer to a living reckoning had only just begun. Mara sat in the dim glow of her small quarters, the faint light from her laptop illuminating her tired face. For months now, she had lived a double life. By day, a quiet technician. By night, a vigilant recorder. Every meeting she attended, every whispered conversation she overheard, she documented meticulously, storing the files in encrypted folders deep within the base's network. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, positioning it just right to capture the hushed voices of the engineers gathered in the conference room. They were discussing the resurrection of the very code that had nearly cost her life, the neural interface technology from Gorgon 7. Gentlemen, a young engineer's voice began, the recent tests on drone responsiveness using the old neural code have shown promising results. We're close to achieving real-time neural command without latency. Mara's heart hammered in her chest. This was what she had feared. The code wasn't just being used, it was being pushed forward, ignoring the ethical warnings buried in the ashes of the original project. Another voice joined in, we need to keep this quiet. The brass doesn't want any leaks. Remember what happened last time with the public fallout? Mara's stomach churned. That public fallout had nearly erased her existence. As the voices faded, she carefully stopped the recording, encrypting the file and marking it as urgent. The risks were immense. Discovery meant not just the end of her job, but the end of her freedom. Still, the truth was a weapon she wielded with quiet precision. In the weeks that followed, Mara compiled a growing archive, audio files of internal meetings, emails detailing unauthorized modifications to UAV control systems, and technical blueprints revealing the neural feedback loops that trace directly back to the original Gorgon 7 algorithms. She reached out to Clarissa Miles, a former engineer turned civilian analyst who was now working outside the military. At first, Clarissa was skeptical but understood the stakes. "I'll help," she said, her voice firm, "but we need to be careful. Expose too much too quickly, and they'll bury us with it." Together, they refined the data, cross-referencing files and verifying sources. Clarissa's network of trusted journalists included Lena Marquez, a military correspondent known for her integrity. Mara sent Lena a secure message, attaching the first batch of evidence, recordings, redacted logs, and detailed accounts of the unauthorized experiments. The message was simple, but loaded. The past is alive. They need to know. Lena's response came swiftly. She expressed her commitment to digging deeper, acknowledging the potential fallout. "This could shake the foundations of military research oversight," she wrote, "but it has to be told." As Mara continued her work, the atmosphere at Phoenix Valley grew tense. Conversations hushed when she entered the room. Unfamiliar faces hovered near her workstation, and security scans on her communications were becoming more frequent. Yet, despite the mounting paranoia, Mara stayed focused. The silent war she fought was becoming a beacon, drawing others who had suffered in the shadows. One evening, as she sat alone in her quarters, Mara reflected on how she had gotten here, the erasure of her past, the betrayals, the relentless fight to remain visible despite attempts to make her disappear. Her tattoo, once a symbol of captivity, had become a mark of defiance. Every encrypted file, every whispered confession, was a testament to the resilience that no order could extinguish. She thought of her brother, the engineer lost to the project's failures, and the faces of the comrades who never made it back. Their silence was a chorus that demanded to be heard. Her resolve hardened. The release of the evidence would be the spark that ignited a reckoning. It was no longer just about her survival. It was about reclaiming truth from the silence that had been forced upon them. The drone bay of Phoenix Valley lay in eerie quiet, a cavernous hollow where time seemed to stand still. Long shadows stretched across cracked concrete, and overhead fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, their weak glow battling the encroaching darkness. Once a bustling hangar, it now stood as a mausoleum to forgotten machines and ambitions, a place where the ghosts of a weapon program that had promised revolution now whispered of ruin. Mara Vega stepped cautiously across the bay floor. Her boots echoed loudly against the steel beams and rusted equipment, the air heavy with the smell of oil and dust. A faint metallic tang clung to the air, a reminder of the cold, forgotten machinery that surrounded her. Her eyes fell upon a weathered drone prototype at the center of the room. Its sleek body was scarred with dents and scratches, an artifact of both human ingenuity and hubris. Near the drone was a plaque etched with the names of 7 engineers, comrades who had perished in pursuit of a vision that had spiraled beyond control. Mara's breath caught in her throat. Those names were etched deeper in her memory than any metal could ever be. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cool surface of the drone's hull. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the dull sheen, her tattoo a twisting double helix intertwined with cryptic symbols. It had once marked her for a fate she could never have imagined. Now it was a silent testament to survival. Collapsing onto a battered crate, Mara let the weight of years press down on her. Memories surged, endless tests that had pushed her body and mind beyond their limits, the electric shocks that had seared through her nervous system, and the devastating failures that had claimed lives, including her brother's. She closed her eyes, the sting of tears sharp yet strangely cathartic. "I thought silence would keep me safe," she whispered to the empty room, "but it only helped them forget that I survived." The ache in her chest shifted, hardening into cold resolve. No longer hidden, Mara's existence was a challenge to everything they had tried to bury. The base outside the hangar pulsed with an almost tangible tension. The expose that had erupted across the news had shattered years of uneasy calm. The headline, "Canceled Weapon Revived in Silence." "The engineer they tried to bury speaks," spread like wildfire, igniting a storm of public outrage and government scrutiny. Phoenix Valley Air Base, once cloaked in secrecy, found itself thrust into the spotlight. Security protocols tightened. Conversations were now laced with suspicion. Investigators from the Department of Defense arrived in droves, their presence a stark reminder that the walls of secrecy were beginning to crumble. Colonel Thomas Kincaid, once the untouchable figure of authority, was now ensnared in a web of allegations. The accusations, falsified safety reports, suppressed warnings, loomed over him like an unrelenting storm cloud. His every decision was dissected, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. The young soldiers who had mocked Mara, laughing at her tattoo, filming her in a worn tank top, now faced the swift consequences of their actions. They were removed from their posts, subjected to disciplinary hearings, and became symbols of the cultural shift that no longer tolerated ignorance or disrespect. Mara, watching the fall of the powerful, felt a complex mix of satisfaction and caution. The collapse of these figures of authority wasn't an end, but a beginning. In the solitude of her quarters, she pored over encrypted files, her fingers dancing over the keyboard, coordinating with an ever-growing network of allies. Clarissa Miles, her trusted former colleague turned civilian analyst, kept her informed of legal strategies and media maneuvers. Lena Marquez, the unrelenting journalist, worked tirelessly on the next wave of public disclosures. Together, they crafted a narrative that was as damning as it was hopeful, a call for accountability and reform. Mara's recordings, once whispered in the shadows, now served as weapons in a battle for transparency. One quiet evening, as she sat by her window gazing at the moonlit base, her phone buzzed with a message from Lena. The story is resonating nationwide. Veterans are reaching out. Support is growing. This is bigger than any of us imagined. Mara smiled softly. The long road from obscurity to becoming a voice had been filled with obstacles, but now that path shimmered with new possibilities. Her thoughts lingered on the comrades lost, on the silence they had borne, and on the promise she had made to ensure their sacrifices wouldn't fade into nothingness. As dawn's first light crept over the horizon, Mara steeled herself for the battles yet to come. The silence had been broken. The shadows were receding. Justice was no longer just a whispering hope, but a rising tide. And Mara Vega was ready to carry the fight forward. The morning sun cast a pale light over the streets surrounding Phoenix Valley Air Base. Inside the operations center, the buzz of activity was palpable as personnel began their shifts. But today was different. A tension thicker than usual filled the air, heavy with uncertainty and suspicion. Across the country, the military and civilian worlds were abuzz with the explosive revelation that had just hit the news. The article, "Canceled Weapon Revived in Silence." The engineer they tried to bury speaks, had shattered the fragile veil of secrecy surrounding the Gorgon 7 program's forbidden resurrection. Lena Marquez's incisive reporting had sent shockwaves through the Department of Defense, detailing the unauthorized use of neural interface code on advanced drones and exposing a web of deceit, cover-ups, and the devastating cost of silence. Back at Phoenix Valley, Colonel Thomas Kincaid's phone buzzed relentlessly. Each call, each notification, was a reminder of the storm closing in. His usual composed demeanor was starting to crack as he fielded urgent inquiries from superiors demanding immediate action and explanations. At 9 o'clock a.m. sharp, a classified directive arrived at the base command center. All experimental drone operations linked to Project Gorgon 7 were to be suspended immediately, no exceptions. Security teams went into overdrive, locking down sensitive areas, shutting down testing bays, and auditing access logs. The once vibrant labs now felt hollow, their only occupants the hurried footsteps of personnel and whispered exchanges. Mara watched from a safe distance, her eyes sharp, calculating. The wheels of justice were turning, but the path ahead was fraught with peril. She recalled the countless nights spent gathering evidence, encrypting files, in the quiet resolve that had carried her this far. Then an anonymous email landed in the inboxes of both base command and investigative teams alike. It was short but damning, detailing unauthorized code use, logs of experiments, and escalating risks. The sender, an insider with intimate knowledge of the covert operations, begged for intervention before disaster could strike. The chain reaction was swift. Emergency meetings were convened at the Pentagon. Senior officials scrambled to understand the gravity of the situation. A program thought dead had been quietly revived, threatening both national security and human lives. Meanwhile, back at the base, morale began to fracture. Whispers of distrust replaced the usual camaraderie. Technicians eyed each other warily, uncertain who might be the next whistleblower, or worse, the next scapegoat. Despite the rising tension, Mara felt a quiet sense of vindication. The truth was no longer buried in the shadows. It pulsed through every corner of the military establishment. Outside the command center, reporters and activists gathered, their voices forming a chorus demanding accountability and reform. The story had crossed the line from hidden scandal to public reckoning, but the fight was far from over. The forces that once sought to silence Mara and bury the Gorgon 7 program were regrouping. The days ahead would test the courage, resolve, and enduring power of truth. Inside the Phoenix Valley briefing room, Colonel Kincaid stood before a sea of stern faces, high-ranking officers and civilian oversight officials who had flown in at a moment's notice. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations. Kincaid's usual composure faltered, giving way to a clenched jaw and darting eyes. General Harper, known for her unwavering commitment to ethics, opened the session. Colonel Kincaid, your failure to report the unauthorized use of neural interface code constitutes a breach of military protocol and endangers countless lives. Kincaid swallowed, nodding stiffly. Yes, ma'am, I take full responsibility for the lapses in oversight. The room buzzed with murmurs of disapproval. Mara Vega, a seasoned technician at Phoenix Valley Air Base, had become a symbol of resilience. Her actions, fueled by years of silence and buried truths, had ignited a firestorm. At 44, with the mark of the Gorgon 7 neural interface project etched into her skin, Mara had defied her past, no longer willing to stay in the shadows. Her tattoo, once a symbol of forced erasure, now stood as a testament to the strength she'd found in exposing the secrets that had haunted her. The political capital of Colonel Thomas Kincaid was rapidly dwindling, a casualty of his own decisions. Once a powerful figure, Kincaid now found himself facing the fallout of his cover-ups. His role in authorizing the erasure of Mara's records and the Gorgon 7 project was no longer something he could control. The truth, like a freight train, had barreled forward, and now there was no stopping it. Mara, however, wasn't alone. Veteran advocates and legal experts approached her with unwavering conviction. Your courage to speak out has saved lives, they said, their voices strong and resolute. They warned her of the challenges ahead, but assured her she wouldn't walk this treacherous road alone. The weight of their words settled on Mara, reinforcing her sense of purpose. The days that followed saw the base in turmoil as the consequences of Gorgon 7's revival echoed through the halls of Phoenix Valley. Drone hangars were sealed, and experiments came to an abrupt halt. Personnel were either reassigned or placed on administrative leave as investigations began. Among those affected were 3 soldiers who had openly mocked Mara's tattoo and tank top. Their conduct, a reflection of the ignorance and arrogance of some younger service members, made headlines. One of them, despite being reprimanded and sent to a remote outpost, publicly denied the allegations, facing harsh criticism both online and within the military. Then one day, a young soldier named Reyes approached Mara in the hangar's cafeteria, his steps unsure. Miss Vega, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened, for the way we treated you, he said, his voice heavy with regret. Mara lifted her gaze to meet his, and after a long moment, she simply nodded, acknowledging his apology. Her silence was a quiet reflection of her inner strength, resistance, not in words but in action. She turned and walked away, feeling the fragile cracks in her emotional armor begin to form. The Department of Defense, shaken by the revelations, implemented sweeping changes. New regulations mandated all military AI and neurotech projects to undergo rigorous ethical reviews by panels that included veterans and medical experts. The centerpiece of this overhaul was the Mara Protocol, named in honor of the very woman who had sparked the movement. It required oversight committees to include personnel with real-world combat experience, ensuring that the people affected by these technologies had a voice in their development. Mara, now a pivotal figure in the struggle for ethical reform, was invited to join one such committee. Her role, no longer limited to technician, was now one of leadership, shaping the future of military technology with humanity and accountability at its core. As she presented to government officials, her tattoo peeked out proudly from beneath her rolled-up sleeve. It was no longer a mark of forced silence, but a symbol of the truth she had fought to reveal. Despite the changes, the fight was far from over. The weeks following the public expose were filled with meetings, investigations, and shifting allegiances. At Phoenix Valley, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Behind closed doors, commanders whispered, technicians eyed each other nervously, and the base seemed to shudder under the weight of constant scrutiny. Yet Mara moved through it all with unwavering resolve. What had once been a place of betrayal now became a battleground for accountability. Veterans, disillusioned by their own silencing, reached out to Mara, sharing their stories of corruption and cover-ups. Each tale deepened her conviction. One afternoon, a surprising message arrived, a request for an urgent meeting with Captain Reyes, the base's new ethics oversight officer. Reyes, a young soldier who had publicly apologized to Mara, had recently transferred from a logistics post. In a quiet conference room bathed in the soft light of late afternoon, Reyes spoke with raw honesty. The culture here is changing, but it's slow. There are still factions working to undermine the investigation and protect their own, he said. Mara, her gaze steady, nodded. We expected resistance. Change never comes easily, she replied, her voice unwavering. Reyes continued, his words full of hope. But the tide is turning. More whistleblowers are coming forward. We've seen more reports of misconduct. Together we can build a network of support, people committed to exposing corruption and protecting those who speak out. Meanwhile, outside the base, the media's spotlight only grew brighter. Lena Marquez, the journalist whose work had helped bring Mara's story to the public, continued her exposés. Her follow-up stories captured the human cost of unchecked technological ambition, and public support surged behind the call for stricter military oversight. The hashtags untouched Mara Protocol and hashtags Truth in Tech trended, forcing lawmakers to take action. Congressional hearings were scheduled, and bills proposing comprehensive reforms to military AI and neurotechnology oversight gained momentum. Back at Phoenix Valley, the fallout from the revelations continued to spread. Suspended personnel underwent reviews, policies were rewritten, and new training programs were put in place to cultivate a culture of ethical vigilance. Yet Mara knew the struggle was far from over. Beneath the surface, old alliances remained, plotting to regain the power they had lost. One evening, as Mara was preparing to leave the base, a shadowy figure slid an anonymous note under her door. It was a warning retaliation would be imminent if she didn't cease her activities. Unfazed, Mara passed the threat along to her allies. Fear is a weapon they've wielded for too long, she said. We will not be intimidated. Her resolve galvanized others, and the network of support only grew stronger. As the sun set over Phoenix Valley, Mara stood tall, her tattoo now a symbol not just of survival, but of a new era of accountability and transparency. The tide was rising, and with it, the promise of lasting change. The day of the military hearing arrived. The room was imposing, rows of polished wood, stiff chairs, and a raised dais where a panel of senior officers and legal advisors presided. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of consequence. Colonel Kincaid sat rigidly at the defendant's table, his usual composure shattered. His hands clenched tightly around a stack of papers, his once certain demeanor replaced with anxiety and defiance. At the front of the room, Brigadier General Melissa Warren, the hearing chair, called the session to order. Colonel Kincaid, you stand accused of serious breaches of protocol, including failure to disclose critical risks associated with the Gorgon 7 program and the deliberate manipulation of official records. How do you plead? Kincaid's voice, though steady, betrayed a strain. I deny intentional wrongdoing, ma'am. All decisions were made in the interest of national security and operational integrity. The tension in the room thickened, and the fate of a career, a legacy, and a nation's future hung in the balance. As Mara Vega walked into the hearing room, all eyes were on her. Gone was the quiet, unassuming technician, and in her place stood a woman brimming with conviction, her every step purposeful, every move deliberate. The tattoo on her arm peeked from beneath her rolled-up sleeve, a stark reminder of her survival, a symbol not only of the torment she had endured, but also of the truth she was determined to reveal. She made her way to the podium, her eyes scanning the room before she spoke, her voice steady and clear. I am here today not simply to recount events, but to expose a culture of silence and deception that has allowed this organization to sweep dangerous truths under the rug, endangering not just lives, but the very security of this nation. With those words, Mara held up a small recording device, its significance weighing heavy in the air. These, she said, are recordings from internal meetings, proof of a deliberate cover-up, an intentional disregard for ethics, and the sacrifice of innocent lives for the sake of national security. She clicked play, and the room fell into a tense silence as the voices from the recordings filled the space. Mara listened intently as the excerpts echoed through the room, voices discussing the risks of the Gorgon 7 project, ordering silence, dismissing concerns. Among them was the voice of Colonel Thomas Kincaid, the very man who had sanctioned the erasure of her records and hidden the truth. She will never speak. On paper, she does not exist. His chilling words reverberated in the room. A cold silence descended. Some of the panel members exchanged furtive glances. Others turned their heads, unable to meet her gaze. General Melissa Warren, presiding over the hearing, broke the quiet with a question that carried the weight of accountability. Colonel Kincaid, how do you respond to these allegations? For a moment, Kincaid hesitated, his face betraying no emotion as he straightened in his chair. I acknowledge there were errors in judgment, he said, his tone measured. But I maintain that national security concerns were the driving force behind my actions. Mara's response was swift and cutting. Covering up risks is not protecting security. It puts everything at risk, lives, futures, our integrity. The hearing continued for hours. Witnesses were called and documents examined. The evidence was damning. Outside the room, news cameras rolled, capturing the swelling tide of public opinion as people took to social media, demanding justice and calling for reform. By the end of the day, Kincaid's defense had crumbled. The public outcry had been relentless, and his military career had effectively ended. That night, the full recordings were aired on national military broadcasts, leaving no room for doubt. Kincaid was exposed for the architect of a system that refused to acknowledge its own failings until the truth was brought into the light. Meanwhile, Mara stood as a beacon of strength and resilience. Veterans, politicians, and the general public hailed her courage. But even in the face of this victory, she remained wary. She knew this was just the beginning, and real change would require far more than a hearing. It would require vigilance, patience, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. As the city buzzed with the aftermath, Mara continued her quiet work at Phoenix Valley Air Base, her tattoo a constant reminder of the battles yet to be fought. The impact of her testimony rippled across the base, reaching every corner of the sprawling installation. What had begun as a solitary act of defiance now sparked a movement, calling for accountability, transparency, and an end to the culture of silence that had allowed these wrongs to persist. The soldiers who had mocked Mara, Private Daniels, Reyes, and the others, found themselves in the crosshairs of military discipline. The disciplinary board convened swiftly, addressing the months of unchecked misconduct. The evidence against them was undeniable. Videos of their taunts, testimonies from witnesses, and the undeniable shift in military policy towards a more respectful, inclusive environment. Private Daniels, the loudest of the group, tried to defend his actions. It was just a joke, he said, his voice weak. We didn't mean anything by it. But Major Reynolds, presiding over the hearing, was having none of it. There is no place in this military for disrespect, especially not for someone who has served with the honor and courage that Mara Vega has. This behavior is corrosive to the very fabric of our unit. The verdict was swift. The 3 soldiers were reassigned to remote posts far from the front lines. 2 of them left the military entirely, unable to face the consequences of their actions. Private Reyes, who had sought Mara's forgiveness and expressed genuine remorse, opted for retraining, focusing on bias awareness and ethical conduct. Mara, receiving official notices and informal messages about their fates, responded with quiet reflection. She did not seek vengeance. She wanted change, true and lasting change. She understood that justice was a process, not an event. But the ripple effect went beyond the base. National conversations erupted about military culture, respect, and the treatment of veterans. Social media exploded with hashtags like @RespectTheBadge and #MaraProtocol, calling for a cultural overhaul. Some voices demanded harsher punishments for the soldiers who had mocked Mara. Others pointed to the slow pace of systemic reform. For Mara, the attention was both humbling and affirming. She found solace in small, personal victories. One afternoon, as she passed through the base's cafeteria, a young technician met her gaze and gave a tentative nod, an unspoken acknowledgement of respect. Later, an unsigned letter arrived in her locker. "Your courage has opened doors we thought were forever closed. Thank you for standing tall when it mattered most." Mara kept the letter tucked away, a quiet reminder of the impact she had made. Phoenix Valley Air Base, too, had begun to change. New regulations were swiftly drafted and implemented, ensuring that all neurotechnology and AI projects now underwent ethical review by veterans with battlefield experience. Training on empathy, respect, and inclusivity became mandatory for all ranks. And the phrase Mara Protocol began circulating informally, symbolizing the cultural shift that had taken root. Despite the progress, resistance lingered, especially among the old guard. Some officers grumbled about the rise of political correctness, and doubts about the effectiveness of new oversight persisted. But for Mara, these were battles already won. She continued her work in the maintenance bays, her tattoo visible as ever, a living testament to resilience. One evening, a fellow engineer approached her, hesitant but determined. "Miss Vega, I just wanted to say thank you. You've shown us all that respect isn't optional. We all have a part to play in this." Mara smiled, her voice soft but firm. "We all do." The days ahead promised more challenges, but also hope. And with every step she took, Mara's silent strength paved the way for the soldiers who would follow in her footsteps. Phoenix Valley was no longer the same place it had once been. Its corridors, once filled with the humdrum of routine, now echoed with the energy of change. A new chapter in the story of military ethics and accountability, written by a woman who had dared to stand alone. Mara Vega, a 44-year-old seasoned technician at Phoenix Valley Air Base, sat down at the head of the table, her gaze steady and focused. She had come a long way since the shadows of the Gorgon 7 project. Her skin still bore the tattoo marking her as one of the few survivors, a permanent reminder of the choices made long before her. Now she was at the forefront of a movement she had spent years helping to shape, the Mara Protocol, a groundbreaking initiative aimed at ensuring ethical oversight in military tech. The Mara Protocol was designed with one core principle, that veterans, those who had faced the real horrors of war, must be at the center of any project that involved artificial intelligence or neural technologies. These were not just abstract concepts to them, they were the very tools of warfare. Some embraced the idea, understanding the value of experience and the necessity of emotional grounding in the development of such technologies. Others, however, resisted. They saw it as an unwanted intrusion of sentiment into the cold logic of military strategy. For Mara, though, this was about more than just policy. It was about ensuring that technology never outran humanity. The advisory committee that had gathered that day included representatives from the Department of Defense, civilian oversight agencies, medical ethics boards, and veteran advocacy groups. The atmosphere was sterile and formal, the air thick with politics. Yet Mara stood firm in her convictions, her voice calm but authoritative. "The stakes are too high to allow technology to outpace conscience," she declared, eyes scanning the room. "We must anchor innovation in humanity." Her words were a clarion call that cut through the noise of bureaucracy. She proposed clear, actionable steps, mandatory psychological assessments for all personnel working on neural tech projects, whistleblower safeguards, and periodic public audits to ensure accountability. The room was split. Some nodded in agreement, understanding the wisdom in her experience, while others bristled at the thought of oversight and increased regulations. But Mara was unyielding. As the discussions continued, she navigated the politics with a deft touch. Resistance came from all sides: budget-conscious hawks, security-minded commanders, and defensive technicians. Yet through it all, Mara remained determined, pressing forward with the conviction that the future had to be built on a foundation of ethical integrity. Outside the committee rooms, Mara's influence began to take root at Phoenix Valley. The younger soldiers, once quick to mock her tattoo, now approached her with curiosity. In one such encounter, a young recruit named Reina, after training, hesitated before speaking up. "Miss Vega," she asked shyly, "may I ask about your tattoo? What does it mean to you?" Mara smiled gently, the setting sun casting a soft glow over her skin as she exposed the tattoo on her shoulder. "It was once a mark of survival and silence," she explained, her voice low but steady. "But now it's a warning and a promise. The past will not be forgotten, and the future must be guarded with care." Reina nodded, taking in the weight of her words. It was clear that Mara's legacy was already beginning to shape the next generation of soldiers. Leadership, too, had begun to take notice. Colonel Sanders, the new base commander, invited Mara to lead workshops on the ethical integration of technology. Her curriculum wasn't just about machines, it was about people. She blended technical training with lessons on empathy, history, and moral courage, fostering a bridge between the old guard and the new recruits. These sessions became a gathering point for both veterans and newcomers alike, uniting them through their shared experiences in a common mission to build a better future. Late nights often found Mara alone in her office, reflecting on how far she had come. From a forgotten soul erased from records to now being the architect of reform, she kept a small, faded photo on her desk, a reminder of the 7 engineers who had perished in the wake of Gorgon 7. Their silence haunted her still, but their memory fueled her determination to make sure their sacrifices were not in vain. Back in the hangars, the hum of drone engines had returned, but with a marked difference. Now, under the newly implemented oversight protocols, every test flight was scrutinized, every data point examined for ethical compliance. The changes were slow, painstaking, but they were real. And as Mara sat in her office one afternoon, a message from Captain Reyes pinged on her screen. "I'm grateful for the path you've paved," he wrote, a humility in his words that had not been there before. "I'm committed to upholding these standards for those who came before and those who will come after." Mara's response was simple but resonant. "We rise by lifting others." Her influence had spread far beyond Phoenix Valley. Across the Department of Defense, similar protocols began to emerge, modeled after the foundation she had helped build. Advocacy groups credited her with shifting the conversation about military tech ethics, focusing not just on the abstract risks, but on the lived experiences of those who had borne the weight of those technologies. Despite the progress, the fight was far from over. There were still those who sought to bypass the regulations, and bureaucracy often stifled swift action. Yet, Mara never wavered, balancing her technical duties with her advisory role, always mindful of the fragile nature of reform. One evening, while walking across the base, Mara passed a mural created by local artists. It was a vibrant tribute to the legacy of both veterans and innovators. In the center of the mural stood a woman, her double helix tattoo on display, surrounded by symbols of both technology and humanity. Mara paused, her heart swelling with quiet pride. The tattoo, once solely her own, had now become a beacon for others. Phoenix Valley stirred with anticipation. The announcement of a new ethical standard, named after Mara Vega, was more than a symbolic gesture. It was a testament to the work she had done and the changes she had set in motion. Standing before an assembly of military leaders, engineers, veterans, and journalists, Mara knew this was only the beginning. She was no longer a quiet figure in the background. Now she was leading the conversation about the future of warfare and ethics, and the room hung on her every word. Her speech was calm but resolute. "We have seen what happens when innovation outpaces conscience, when progress comes at the cost of silence and sacrifice. The Mara Protocol is our commitment to ensure technology serves humanity, not the other way around." She outlined the core tenets of the protocol: the inclusion of veterans in all oversight committees, rigorous psychological and ethical screening of projects, whistleblower protections, and transparent reporting mechanisms. As she spoke, she emphasized the weight of her words. This is not just policy, it is a pledge to those who serve, to their families, and to the nation that we will not repeat the mistakes of the past. The road to implementation was going to be long and complex, but Mara had already become the linchpin, coordinating efforts across various sectors, to ensure the new standard was carried out. The Mara Protocol was no longer just a set of regulations. It was a promise that would shape the future of military technology for generations to come. Mara Vega stood at the heart of Phoenix Valley Air Base, her presence commanding respect from all who crossed her path. As a 44-year-old veteran technician, she bore the weight of a past that had shaped her into something more than just a survivor. Her tattoo, once a symbol of erasure and a painful reminder of the Gorgon 7 project, had grown into something far more profound. It was a mark of resilience, an emblem of strength, and a quiet testament to the power of truth. Over the years, Mara had become an indomitable force in the military community, not just as a technician, but as a mentor, a leader, and an advocate for ethical change. Her mission was clear: expose the lies that had concealed the horrors of Gorgon 7 and ensure that technology, especially the cutting-edge military systems, would never again be used without accountability. The days at Phoenix Valley were filled with intense meetings and technical evaluations, but Mara's role had grown far beyond simply overseeing repairs and maintenance. She spearheaded new training modules for soldiers and technicians, instilling not only the technical skills needed to operate sophisticated systems, but also the ability to recognize and confront ethical dilemmas without fear of reprisal. She encouraged her fellow soldiers to speak up and to challenge authority when necessary. To her, integrity wasn't just a concept, it was the bedrock of military effectiveness. Mara's mentorship program paired experienced veterans with new recruits, helping to foster an environment of mutual respect and shared responsibility. Her tattoo, once a scar, now served as a quiet emblem of this new culture, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could be transformed into symbols of strength. Despite the positivity that surrounded her efforts, not everyone shared her enthusiasm. Budget officials questioned the cost of expanded oversight, while some commanders feared that the new protocols would slow critical operations. But Mara stood firm. "True strength lies in knowing the limits of power," she would often say. "Our technology must reflect our values, or it will betray us." Her words echoed beyond the halls of Phoenix Valley, resonating with policymakers and advocates alike. The protocol she championed, the Mara Protocol, began to take root. It became a model for military reform, a shining example of what could be accomplished when integrity was prioritized over convenience. As the protocol spread, so did the media coverage. Stories about Mara's journey and the importance of ethical governance in military technology began to gain traction. Invitations to speak at defense forums, universities, and conferences poured in. Mara shared her experiences, speaking not just about the technical aspects of Gorgon 7, but about the moral cost of secrecy and the enduring importance of truth. Each appearance, each conversation, reinforced the growing consensus that ethics and innovation must advance hand in hand. Back at Phoenix Valley, the cultural shift was slow but steady. New recruits, including a young woman named Raina, began to approach Mara for guidance. Raina, with her wide-eyed curiosity and quiet reverence, was eager to learn. One afternoon, as the two walked together, Raina asked Mara about the meaning behind her tattoo. Mara smiled softly. "It was once a warning," she said, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of years of experience. "Now, it's a promise." Her tattoo, she explained, had once marked a part of her that had been hidden, scars both physical and emotional that were erased in the name of secrecy. But over time, those scars had become symbols of survival, a reminder of what was at stake and a promise to never allow silence to win again. Raina nodded, absorbing the gravity of the words. "It's powerful," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I hope to carry something like that with me." "You already do," Mara replied, placing a hand on Raina's shoulder. "Every action you take, every voice you raise, that is the mark of true courage." Mara's influence extended beyond one-on-one mentorship. She led seminars where she integrated rigorous technical training with lessons on ethics, empathy, and the heavy burden of history. During one session, she spoke candidly about the Gorgon 7 project, not just as a technological failure, but as a moral catastrophe. This technology, she told the group, had the potential to save lives, but without accountability, it became a weapon. Our duty is to ensure that it never happens again. Her words were not just lectures, they were calls to action. Mara fostered a culture of dialogue and critical thinking, encouraging soldiers and engineers to ask difficult questions and engage with ethical dilemmas. Her approach was personal, her stories raw and real. She shared the costs of silence, the weight of complicity, and the courage it took to speak out. Over time, her role as a mentor expanded, and soldiers who once dismissed her as just another technician came to seek her counsel. Private Reyes, once one of her harshest critics, became one of her strongest allies. His transformation was a testament to the healing power of openness and the importance of addressing biases and emotional resilience. Together, they organized workshops on bias recognition, emotional resilience, and ethical responsibility. Core principles of the Mara Protocol. The influence of the Mara Protocol spread far beyond Phoenix Valley. Mara's story inspired a new generation of soldiers and technicians, not just at her base, but across the military. Congressional hearings invited her to testify on the need for human-centered technology governance, while veteran organizations hailed the protocol as a victory for dignity and accountability. Despite all the progress, Mara remained vigilant. She knew that complacency could undo the hard-won gains. Budget cuts, political shifts, and the ever-present pressure of technological advancements threatened to erode the oversight that had become central to the Mara Protocol's success. But Mara was undeterred. She continued to advocate tirelessly for the principles she held dear, knowing that the true test of the protocol lay not in its adoption, but in its sustained commitment. As the sun set over Phoenix Valley, Mara reflected on the path she had traveled. From the shadow of erased identities to the forefront of military reform, her journey had been long and arduous. But with every policy enacted, every voice empowered, she saw the promise of a better future. Her tattoo, glowing softly in the fading light, was no longer just a symbol of survival, it was a symbol of transformation. The late afternoon sun cast long amber shadows across the sprawling hangars of Phoenix Valley. A soft breeze stirred the leaves at the edge of the compound, carrying the whispers of a season's change. In this quiet moment, Mara walked the familiar paths she had once tread as a technician, but now she walked as something more, a living testament to the power of resilience, truth, and the relentless pursuit of ethical leadership. Inside the bustling maintenance hangar, a fresh group of soldiers and engineers worked diligently, their faces a mixture of eagerness and uncertainty. Among them was Reyna, whose eyes often lingered on Mara with a mix of reverence and curiosity. Reyna's journey had only just begun, but the story she had heard about Mara already sparked something deep within her, a quiet determination to follow in her footsteps, to carry the torch of integrity and courage forward. "Miss Vega," Reyna said one afternoon, hesitantly approaching the woman she admired, "I've been meaning to ask about your tattoo. It's unlike anything I've seen. What does it mean to you?" Mara turned to face her, offering a warm, gentle smile. "It means many things," she replied, her voice steady and full of experience. "At first, it was a burden, a reminder of things I wish to forget, scars hidden beneath layers of silence and fear. It marked a part of me that the world tried to erase." Her gaze grew distant as memories flickered behind her eyes, but when she spoke again, her voice was firm, resolute. But over time, that same mark became a promise to never let silence win, to carry the truth forward and protect those who cannot speak for themselves. Reyna nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of Mara's words. "It's powerful," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I hope to carry something like that with me, something meaningful." Mara placed a reassuring hand on Reyna's shoulder. "You already do. Every action you take, every voice you raise, that is the mark of true courage." Mara Vega's voice reverberated with a quiet, resolute power as it reached forums, universities, and international conferences across the globe. Calm, grounded, and unyielding, it stood as a beacon amidst the noise of technical jargon and abstract risk assessments. At one prestigious conference, Mara found herself before a room full of military leaders and technologists, her message cutting through the tension like a blade. "We stand at a crossroads," she declared, her eyes sweeping across the room. "The future of warfare is intertwined with artificial intelligence and neural technology, but it lacks a foundation of ethics. These tools have the potential to dehumanize and destroy." Her words hung in the air, and the room fell into a thoughtful, heavy silence. She paused, letting the weight of her statement settle before continuing. It is our shared responsibility to ensure that innovation honors humanity, she said, her voice steady, that technology serves peace, and that we remember those who bear the cost. The room nodded in agreement, but the silence was a complicated one. Part acknowledgement, part uncertainty. Progress, however, was never easy. Political shifts, budget constraints, and deep-rooted bureaucracies slowed the pace of reform. Yet Mara, undeterred, tackled these challenges with a delicate balance of pragmatism and principle. She knew change would require patience, persistence, and sometimes the subtle art of persuasion. In a tense meeting with defense officials, many of whom were skeptical about the impact of ethical oversight, she delivered her point with clarity. Compromise is necessary, she said, her voice firm, but never at the expense of our values. Without ethics, innovation is hollow. Her conviction was infectious. The skeptics who had once doubted her position began to reconsider, their resolve bending beneath the weight of her argument. Unexpected alliances were forged in those moments, and Mara's influence began to take root in places where silence had once reigned. Back at Phoenix Valley, cultural change began to unfold, gradually but surely. The base, once a shadowed crucible of secrecy, began to embrace openness and dialogue. Training programs shifted focus, incorporating ethical decision-making simulations that urged soldiers to think beyond the battlefield and into the broader scope of humanity. Transparency was encouraged, and whistleblowers found their voices protected, not silenced. Mara's mentorship program flourished, cultivating an environment where respect and camaraderie bridged the divides of rank and discipline. Watching recruits like Reina, eager, thoughtful, and deeply committed, grow into leaders under her guidance filled Mara with pride. In quieter moments, when the chaos of her mission settled, she reflected on how far she had come. From the hidden survivor bearing forbidden marks to a guiding force in military ethics, her path was one of resilience. Her tattoo, once a silent scar, had transformed into a symbol of empowerment, of change. One crisp autumn evening, as the sky turned to purple and gold, Mara stood outside the hangar, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The future remained uncertain, full of complexities and challenges, but she felt ready. Her journey, her tattoo, her mission. They would continue to inspire those who dared to stand for truth and justice. Every step forward was a reminder of the promise etched in ink, the promise that no one would ever be erased again. As the morning sun bathed Phoenix Valley in warm light, a new era dawned. Mara stood quietly, surveying the base she had helped transform, not just in its physical structures, but in its very culture. Her story was no longer her own. It had become part of a larger movement, one that called for technology and ethics to advance hand in hand. The Mara Protocol, as it came to be known, was only the beginning. Across military bases, government offices, and defense labs worldwide, conversations about the human impact of technology began to shift. Mara's voice had become a guiding presence, reminding leaders and engineers alike that behind every system, there lies a responsibility to the people it affects. At Phoenix Valley, a new generation was being trained with this ethos in mind. Veterans mentored recruits, sharing wisdom forged in the crucible of experience and hardship. Rhea, once a nervous newcomer, now led her peers with a quiet confidence, embodying the values Mara had instilled in her. Though new challenges loomed, advances in AI, cyber warfare, and autonomous systems, the lessons of the past provided a solid foundation for responsible innovation. Mara knew that the road ahead would require constant vigilance and courage, but she was prepared. With the right principles guiding them, change was not only possible, it was inevitable. Outside the military, Mara's influence spread. Schools began incorporating ethical technology development into their curricula. Companies sought veteran insights, and communities learned to honor the stories of survival and resilience. Her tattoo, once a mark of silence and erasure, had become a symbol of hope, accountability, and enduring strength. Mara continued her work, quietly, determinedly, balancing her roles as technician, mentor, and advocate. She knew her journey wasn't over. The fight for ethical progress was ongoing, but she faced it with a sense of resolve. As she stood watching the sun set over the airfield, she felt ready, for the ink on her shoulder was no longer just a scar from the past. It was a beacon, lighting the way toward a better future. This legacy, she understood, was not just hers. It belonged to all those who chose to stand visible, to speak truth, and to protect justice. The story of Mara Vega, in its many layers and complexities, continued to unfold. It was a testament to the quiet power of resilience, to the courage of those who serve in silence, and to the unyielding quest for justice. Her path was not easy. It was carved through shadows, silence, pain, and erasure, a path many would have abandoned. But Mara did not. She bore the weight of secrets, shares etched deep beneath her skin and within her spirit. Her tattoo, once a forbidden mark, had become her armor and her banner, a symbol of survival and standing tall against forces that sought to make her invisible. In standing, she found strength, not just for herself, but for countless others. This was more than one woman's fight. It was a reflection of the struggles of many who serve in silence, veterans, whistleblowers, those marginalized and erased by systems that would rather overlook them. It asked us, how often do we look past the visible? How often do we fail to see the quiet battles fought behind closed doors? Mara's journey challenges us to open our eyes and hearts, to listen without judgment, and to honor every story, no matter how quietly it is told. In a world moving faster than ever, technology surges forward with breathtaking speed. But progress without conscience is a dangerous path. The Gorgon 7 program served as a stark reminder of the costs of unchecked ambition, of lives altered, trust broken, and futures jeopardized. Yet through Mara's courage and persistence, a new chapter began. The Mara Protocol stands as a safeguard, a framework reminding us that ethics must walk hand in hand with innovation. It embodies a promise: no one who serves will ever again be erased, silenced, or forgotten. Behind every uniform, every rank, every title, there lies a person, a human being worthy of both respect and recognition. In a world often defined by roles and faceless structures, it's easy to forget that. This story, Mara's story, reminds us of that truth, of the quiet power of resilience. It speaks to the unseen warriors, those whose struggles and sacrifices go unnoticed. If Mara's journey resonates with you, if her strength and defiance in the face of erasure inspire you, please show your support. Like this video. Subscribe to Veteran Biker. Your engagement isn't just about numbers. It's about breathing life into the stories that matter. It's about fostering a community where truth isn't buried, where courage isn't silent, and where voices like Mara's find the air they deserve. We want to hear from you. What part of Mara's story struck you the hardest? Have you or anyone you know ever felt like you were invisible, pushed aside, or denied the respect you've earned? How did you find the strength to rise, to stand again? Share your thoughts. Share your own stories in the comments below. Let's break the silence that surrounds so many uncomfortable truths, because sometimes the battles that change us don't make noise. They aren't fought on the front lines with weapons or boredom. They're fought in the quiet, the invisible spaces, in the moments when we refuse to stay down, when we summon the courage to stand up, to speak, to be seen. Mara's tattoo, that faded ink etched into her skin, is more than just a mark. It's a symbol of survival, a beacon for those who carry unseen scars, for those still searching for their voice. As you watch the next video, remember this: every story carries weight. Every story has the power to change perspectives, to heal, and to spark change. Through stories like Mara's, we build a world that is kinder, more just, and above all, more human. Thank you for joining us at Veteran Biker. Thank you for standing with those who fight in silence. Thank you for believing that one voice, one story, can move mountains. Until next time, stay strong, stay visible, and keep telling the stories that truly matter.